The Israeli argument would be twofold. One of them would be, if you actually read the Bible, we were there like 5,000 years ago, and then we're basically driven out by the Romans. And so it's ours because we were there first. That's first possession from the Israeli side. There's equally first possession from the Palestinian side, right? They say, hey, we were there on the land prior to 1949 when the United Nations created the State of Israel. Our ownership claim is superior to yours because we were there first. Another justification is it's mine because I'm holding on to it, right? Current possession. And the thing that's important, the reason I'm not going to give you a solution, is they're both legitimate justifications. Ownership is essentially storytelling. The question is which story is more persuasive. There is no resource, there is no object that is absolutely one person's or another. There's always some kind of conflicting story anytime there's a dispute. Ownership is always transitory, and ownership only has meaning in terms of compared to whom.
What is your message to people that are fighting right now, that are maybe spreading anti-Semitism or even doing hate crimes and all this stuff just because of all these wars that are going? Like, how should people take ownership and do their part?
Look, I mean, anti-Semitism or anti-Islam or any kind of hatred is just not acceptable in a civilized society. That's not a question of ownership. That's just a question of caring about our fellow human beings. In terms of conflicts over ownership, if you can understand what really is the nature of the conflict, then it's easier to have a discussion that's honest. How are we going to figure this out? Instead of saying, you're a jerk because your skin color is this or your God is so-and-so, saying, okay, I understand your claim and its force. Here's my claim and its force. How are we going to figure this out?
Welcome to Curiousaholic, the show where we question the past and imagine the future. In today's episode, we had a really great guest. His name was James Salzman. He is a distinguished professor of law at the UCLA Law School and the UCSB School of the Environment. He has written many books, one of which we have talked in great detail in today's episode called Mine, How the Hidden Rules of Ownership Control Our Lives. In this book, him and his co-author lay out the foundational rules that we abide by in our daily lives, whether conscious or not. And we also discuss some of the most contentious ownership issues of the modern day. And we also look at how the future of ownership will look like.
So yeah, if you guys like this episode, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All that engagement lets YouTube know that you want to see more of these videos. Or you could also follow us on any of your favorite streaming platforms. So without further ado, here is James Salzman.
James, I'm sitting here in our podcast studio, which I'm pretty convincingly sure that belongs to us, right? Mm-hmm. But does it really, right? That's what we're trying to find out. What defines ownership and what are the different types of ownership?
Yeah, well, that's that we could spend the entire time talking just about that question. So let me start at a high level, and then we can sort of go on with more specific. So ownership is one of the few aspects that's truly universal, right? Any culture you are in or have ever been in or ever will be in, central to that culture's identity is ownership. Who gets what and why, right? So I'm just looking right now, and you've got a computer keyboard in front of you, right? So presumably you'd say that's mine because I paid for it. Maybe you have a receipt. If, however, just making up, I'm sure this is not true, but if, however, Curiousaholic is actually in debt to a bank or to some other lender, and you default, it may be that they can actually seize your computer keyboard or anything else in there, and so what you thought was yours is no longer yours. Right? Ownership is always transitory, and ownership only has meaning in terms of compared to whom. So you have a much stronger claim to your keyboard compared to me. You may or may not have a stronger claim to your keyboard compared to the bank.
Okay.
And we'll get a lot more examples as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get into those.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as we read the book, there are many different types of ownership. Mm-hmm. We could spend a lot of time speaking about all those different types, such as, first in time, possession, labor, attachment, self-ownership, etc. But today we wanted to more focus on a few of those. Sure. And basically, to segue, we want to focus more on ownership when it comes to land and territorial disputes between nations. As we know right now, there's a lot of conflicts around the world, many different places, some known more than others. And it seems like it's a never-ending battle between some territories. So we wanted to ask you, for example, hypothetically, if you were an advisor to a world leader today, for example, the conflict that's going right now in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, which is very contentious, what would you suggest, something to those world leaders to do to come to a resolution?
Yeah, so I'm going to solve the Middle East problem. Thank you.
As best as you can.
As best as you can. In the short time we have.
Some conflicts, sometimes understanding ownership explains better why there is a conflict, and that it may or may not be able to solve it. So let's take Israel and Palestine. Okay, so you mentioned that there are actually 6 different claims that we make for why we own something, and only 6, which in itself is pretty amazing. One of those is first possession. It's mine because I had it first. So let's talk about how that plays out in Israel and Gaza, West Bank, or Palestine more generally. So the Israeli argument, I think, would be twofold. One of them would be if you actually read the Bible, we were there like 5,000 years ago, and then we're basically driven out by the Romans, the diaspora. And so there are a number of groups in Israel who still make that argument. And so it's ours because we were there first, before there were sort of Arab nations and such. That's first possession from the Israeli side. There's equally first possession from the Palestinian side, right? They say, hey, we were there on the land prior to 1949 when the United Nations created the State of Israel. And so our ownership claim is superior to yours because we were there first. So just looking at the simple claim, just looking at the single claim of it's mine because I was there first, you've got this basic conflict. Another justification is it's mine because I'm holding on to it, right? Current possession. It's mine because I've got it, right? So just to illustrate this in a very simple example, let's say you're at a playground and you see a 1-year-old or 2-year-old playing with a toy shovel, and they're holding it. They put it down just to, they're distracted by something, and another 2-year-old picks it up. The first one turns around and starts crying. Why is it crying? It's crying because of first possession. It was mine and you took it. The other child may be crying because of current possession. I'm holding on to it. Right? Those are the thing that's important. The reason I'm not going to give you a solution is they're both legitimate justifications. Right? One of the key insights from our book is that ownership is essentially storytelling. And the question is, which story is more persuasive? There is no resource, there is no object that is absolutely one person's or another. There's always some kind of conflicting story anytime there's a dispute, right? And so, you can apply this current possession, first possession idea back to, with the founding of Canada and the United States, right? The colonization of North America. Obviously, the English and the French were not the first to be there, right? They were the First Nations. They were Native Americans that were living there. Why don't they get it? And so what the lawyers said at the time was, you're occupying it, you're possessing it, but you don't own it. You don't own it because you're not putting it to, quote, productive use. And so the idea is it's only yours if you make use of it. And the idea of living lightly on the land, of sort of following the wildlife and such as needed, but foraging, that was not the European vision of ownership. The European vision of ownership was built towns, was farming, fixed farming with walls, with the stone walls around it. And so any conflict you get, if it's a true conflict, each side's going to have a persuasive argument, story to tell about why their ownership claim is superior. And what using those 6 different archetypes tells you is, let's pick apart, so we understand at least what the claims are. But realize as well that the story of territory is a story of the human condition, right? Throughout history, literally going back to the very first time we came down from the trees, where there basically were effectively group territories. This was this group's territory, that was that group's territory. Another group pushes in, invades. Is it now theirs? Right? And so, to give, excuse me, another example, why isn't Iraq subject to a claim by ancient Babylon, that it should be theirs? Right? At a certain point, claims of territory fade over time. But it's very difficult for those who are living there during that transition period.
So you're kind of, yeah. Obviously, these issues are very complex in nature, right? But it's interesting that you're kind of comparing this to these like more like trivial examples, like with the kids, and it's like, fundamentally humans, we're acting almost like in a trivial way, but almost to like a greater extent with all these greater conflicts, right?
That's exactly right, because we're telling the same stories. And you may be telling a story in a sandbox or telling a story on the Gaza Strip, but it's the same story.
And why do you think we expand, to these greater degrees like that?
Well, because the only reason you need rules about ownership is when a resource is valuable and it's scarce, right? If there's a resource that no one cares about, who cares who owns it? Right?
Right.
If there's a resource that people care about, but there's so much of it, there's enough to go around, who cares who owns it? Right? You two don't argue about which breath of air you're going to take. There's enough air in your studio that you can both breathe, right?
Yeah.
And by contrast, when you talk about Kashmir, when you talk about the West Bank and Gaza, when you talk about Taiwan, when you talk about the South China Sea, when you talk about any territorial conflict, the scarce resource is the land, and more than one side wants it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's the scarcity of these resources that's causing the conflicts.
Of the valued resources. That's right. You need both.
Of the valued resources. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And my next question was going to be regarding people, how they claim ownership based on religious beliefs or religious scriptures that they say that, gives them a claim to their land. But again, I guess that falls into just their story that they're telling of possession. It's just this one is written in a religious book, right?
My story is better than your story, and my story is divine, right?
Even more. That's even better.
My religion by not accepting my story, but it's a story. It's a story.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like with the divine, it's even more so as if it absolute. God told us, this was given to us. So
right, and we know God was the first possessor, right? So, but it's interesting. You look at the Garden of Eden story, which is the most sort of fundamental story of the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? And the story is all about ownership, right? So God basically says to Adam and Eve, "Welcome to my garden. You can do with it what you want, but you see that tree over there and the fruit on that tree, it's mine. Don't touch, don't take it." And of course, they do. And that leads them basically to be trespassers. They are ejected from the garden, and the archangel Michael stands in front of the garden door with a flaming sword, right? And God doesn't just change the locks, right? Basically, you've got this notion of ownership and of theft. You can't steal something unless someone else owns it, right? And this notion of trespass. And so 3 fundamental ideas of ownership are central to the Garden of Eden story. And what's interesting is it's true for other cultures too. So think about Greek mythology, right? So the foundation of sort of humanity in Greek mythology is Prometheus. He takes fire from Mount Olympus, steals it, and gives it to humans, right? The whole story is based on theft. He took something that he didn't own and he gave it to someone else who now owned it.
So through theft, he changed the ownership. Is that, like, if I understand? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very simple. There are certain things that you don't take. You don't take you don't take the fruit from the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. You don't take fire from Mount Olympus. Why don't you take it? Because it's not yours.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we talked about religious beliefs and we talked about, other means of ownership. But, other than religious beliefs, sometimes there are also disputes of land based on historical events of a nation, right? An example of this is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Yep.
Basically, Russia is claiming some of the territories that Ukraine is sitting on and as their own, right? Because of its history and all. So how would you explain the reasoning of Russia taking over Ukraine? Is that justified in your opinion?
Well, I'm not going to get into geopolitics. I certainly don't. I don't support their invasion of Ukraine, if that's what you're asking.
Oh, yeah.
But
No.
in terms of the ownership aspect to it, Russia, as I understand it, Russia's claim is quite similar to what I described for Israel, which is Putin, as I understand it, denies that there is a Ukraine. Right, his view is that was always part of the greater Russia. And that this sort of imposter state arose, but really is part of Russia, and so Russia is simply reclaiming what always belonged to Russia. Putin has not described it as invading Ukraine or as defeating Ukraine, as if it's some separate nation with its own justification for independence. He's described it basically as we are reuniting Russians.
Mm. So would that fall under the rule of attachment?
No, well, he's not making the attachment argument. The attachment argument would be you're next to us, and therefore you're also ours. He's making a first possession argument.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The region of Ukraine, the argument goes, has always been part of Russia, greater Russia.
Mm.
Okay.
Interesting. So it has some similarities then, again, with the Israel-Palestine, with the stories that they're telling. It's just in a different context here.
That's right.
And you think a lot of mm-hmm. And you think a lot of these territorial conflicts, fundamentally, do you think that's where the problem is rooted? That kind of like first come, first serve kind of mentality, or does it expand into other rules?
It's also the current possession mentality, right? The Ukrainians quite justifiably are saying, "Hey, we're here. We've been here for at least 1,000 years. So we own it because we have it. We hold it. Current possession."
Mm. Yeah, the possession rule of ownership. Yeah.
But think about Crimea, right? So Crimea, the argument is Russia is saying current possession, and Ukraine is saying first ownership, right? Because Russia invaded Crimea, they now occupy it. They're saying, "Hey, we're here."
Okay, so they're using like different rules of ownership to defend their position, right? Like Russia. Okay,
different story. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, it always comes down to the story that people tell and which one people want to believe.
Find it persuasive or not?
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. Okay.
So, in your opinion, there isn't any objectively better story, or is it just whichever story everyone agrees upon, then we should all roll with it?
So there are two questions there, right? So the first question is there a better story? And the answer is, yeah, there's a better story. I mean, I don't defend slavery. That's an ownership claim, right? So owning someone else's body is a current possession. I hold you in bondage, therefore I own you, right? That's not a good story, but it's a story that, many people told themselves for hundreds of years, right? And so some stories are better than others, but the key point is that in terms of politics and in terms of sort of everyday existence, what matters is the stories that we find persuasive. And again, you can show this with trivial examples. Okay, so let's say you go to the supermarket and you've got a carton of milk and some butter in your shopping cart. You do, Heiko. And then Evan walks by. You're waiting in line, and Evan walks by and says, "Oh man, I've been looking for that butter." Reaches into your cart, takes the butter, and then goes to a different checkout. Right? What's your reaction?
I'll be like, "Well, wait a minute, I took that first."
Yeah, but you don't own it at that point, right? I remember you. Yeah, this was mentioned in the book, right?
Yeah. What's your intuition?
But mine would be, it would be like, well, I took it. It's mine for now until I buy it.
Right?
It's in my cart.
There are two stories going on there, right? One is current possession or first possession. The other is labor. It's mine because I worked for it. I went to the dairy aisle. I chose the butter. I put it in my cart. I wheeled it all the way back. And you, lazy bum, are just standing by the checkout. You just take it, right? And Evan's argument is current possession. Dude, you don't legally own it. You haven't paid for it yet. I'm holding it, so it looks to me like it's mine.
Yeah, this is not even a hypothetical story. This actually happened.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, actually, it does. Yeah, I've had situations like that where just people, maybe the cart is left alone for a while and they take something because it's the only one, and you come back to it. You're like,
there's a really important point that comes out of that, which is that we tend to think of ownership and property as very legal. There are laws, there are courts, there are statutes. In fact, 99.9% of the interactions we have where ownership matters are outside the law. Something as simple as going to the supermarket is full of ownership decisions. And those are all sort of informal. They're called norms. They're just custom. And we all decide.
What do you mean by outside the law? Can you elaborate on that?
So let's say you took the butter. Can he take you to court?
No.
No, but there's a clear sense you did something wrong.
Okay.
And so there's this sort of informal understanding that stuff in your cart is yours.
It's like these constructs that we make. Yeah. Okay.
But we share, right?
That we share. Yeah.
And so we'll think of standing in line. That's another good example. So I don't know what the practice is in Montreal. In England, I can tell you people queue very, very carefully. And if someone cuts in front of them in the line, in the queue, that's a big deal, right? I've traveled in China, at least where I've been, there are no lines. It's just, the door's open and it's a scrum to get in. And if you wait for if you're standing in line, well, you're a sucker because other people aren't standing in line, right? So that's all informal. But those are things that affect every single day when you go to the shop, when you go to the deli, when you go to the bakery, right? For any of these things, there are understood rules that you follow about, your place in line is actually an ownership claim. I have a superior right to get in before you do, or vice versa. That's all about ownership. That's not law. That's not legal.
Okay. Well, it would just be too laborious, and it would take so much time to put all of these into law. And how could
we don't need to?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we don't. Yeah.
It's just mutually understood by everyone, right?
That if I'm first in line, then you respect that.
Right. Until it's not, and then you get some problems. So the anchor story we have in the book, it got a lot of attention when the book came out in terms of podcasts and radio and such. Was they were reclining seat on an airplane. Right. Who owns the wedge of space behind the airline seat? Is the person who's trying to lean back, or is the person who's trying to work on their laptop? Right? They both have legitimate claims, right? One is attachment, which is I've got this button which allows me to go back into the space that's attached to the back of my seat, and the other is first possession. I was here first using my laptop, and it turns out that people don't agree about that. We did scores of talks and podcasts and such. We'd always poll the audience: are you a knee defender or a recliner? Who has the right? And it always split close to 50-50.
Yeah, I remember that in the book too. Yeah. I think they banned the sale, right, of knee defenders?
The knee defenders, they banned the sale. Yeah, this was something that locked the seat in place in front. Yeah. Too many fights broke out.
Well, I imagine,
Yeah, there was another example in the book I remember is the parking spots, right? People would reserve parking spots with
I think in Boston, during winter time with the chairs.
With the chairs, yeah.
Man, I found that
in Montreal after a big snowstorm, you dig out your parking space. Is it just open?
Oh, here?
Yeah, I mean, we don't put chairs or anything.
It becomes so messy that people just stop caring where they park at some point. Just let me park here.
It's so hard to get rid of all this snow anyway.
You can't see the lines. Let's say you go to a public.
But it's interesting. Obviously you get a lot of snow, but I mean, Chicago, Pittsburgh, they have parking chairs. Boston have parking chairs. New York doesn't have parking chairs. Montreal apparently doesn't have parking chairs. I don't know about
No. Yeah, when I heard that part, I was really surprised that people
and that
go
even
to those
some people go to the length of damaging someone's car. I think at one point
they don't respect. Respect tone.
Wow. Okay.
Respect the chair. Yeah, because it's locals versus outsiders. Locals respect these rules. Outsiders don't, but they pay a price because they get their cars keyed.
Interesting, yeah. How the customs even vary from just state to state, or even
like if someone would put a chair here on a parking spot, I'd be like, what is this chair doing
here?
We would
just
like
remove it
or something.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, but think about it, right? I mean, so you go to a concert and you see a program, two programs on a program on each chair, on two chairs. Are you going to sit down?
I guess not. No, because you're like, oh, someone was here before me, right?
Okay,
By respect.
So you recognize the symbol of claimed ownership and you respect it. If you see a chair in the street, you don't recognize it, and if you do, you don't respect it.
Yeah.
Right. We use symbolic claims all the time. Symbolic ownership.
Yeah, an example that comes to my mind is when I go to the gym, like people, they put like their equipment on the machines, right? And then they just leave it there and they're like, oh, I can't use this machine. Someone's, towel there.
Yeah. And then at a certain point, it's like, dude, you get 10 minutes. You don't get more than that.
Yeah.
Or you don't, right? So what's interesting is you get more and more sophisticated about what this means, right? So there's a towel on, I don't know, a free weight bench or something. Does that mean that it's there as long as the towel is there? Or at a certain point, you've been working out for half an hour, the towel is still there. What do you do?
Exactly.
Yeah, I might maybe go ask.
You go see the person, like, what are you doing with this bench, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Or maybe ask someone from the gym.
Who the person is.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't know who the person is, maybe I'll ask a staff member, say, hey, there's benches being occupied, can I use it?
Yeah, these customs we adopt, I guess.
Yeah, it becomes blurry. Like, I understand what you're saying. It's like who decides when, what. We're constantly basically negotiating all these different ownerships between each other.
That's the takeaway. Yeah. Ownership is always up for grabs. Always.
Yeah. And as we evolve as humans, I think the better ownership stories are going to be with the values that we adopt, basically. Before, slavery was okay, so ownership of people was okay, but now it's not, so it's no more the case. Yeah. So now, as the second part, before we end the podcast, we want to talk about the future of ownership, because that is also discussed in the book. In chapter 7 of your book, I know that you mentioned that we are moving slowly towards a sharing economy more and more, right? So a lot of people have access to different goods and services, such as bike rental, vacation rentals, streaming services, etc. So all these different goods and services that would be really costly upfront, but now we have access because of sharing it among many people. Would you say, in that sense, that we're slowly moving to a better future of ownership?
Well, it's an interesting story, because what we wrote the book came out in 2021. We wrote the book, started writing the book, 2018, 2019. And there was still a lot of incredible enthusiasm about the sharing economy, right? Because the thing, take the example of you want to hang something on your wall, so you have to drill a hole. So you could, buy a drill, but you don't need the drill. You need the hole. And so why instead wouldn't you basically go to a website and say, hey, I can find this person who has a drill who's not using it. I can pay him a few dollars. I'll use it and then give it back to them. All right. That was sort of the classic story about the sharing economy. And it turns out that the sharing economy has expanded in a few areas, mostly transport, as you mentioned, but not in others, right? The websites that were set up for sharing tools or sharing this have not been popular, and so what we're learning is the sharing economy, it turns out, has limited reach. It makes a lot of sense for things that are very expensive, and you need the service, right? So I need to get around in a car. I don't want to go to Avis or Hertz. I'll just do Zipcar, right? Or I want to get somewhere in Montreal, hilly. Instead of buying a bicycle and figuring out locks and such, or buying a scooter, I've just basically got these sharing services that I can use. So that's actually that's not sharing. Actually, that's different, right? So the example with the scooter is a separate company that provides them. But the point is, if you think about it, how many sharing businesses actually have survived? Not a lot, right? So it turns out that one of the aspects that the early boosters, and there were a lot of boosters, didn't take adequately into account is that there's a hassle factor, right? I don't want to go across town to get your drill, go back to my place, and then go back to your place to return it. A drill's $30. I'll just buy the drill, And so what's interesting is that, when we started writing the book, everyone and their sister was talking about how the world's going to look like a sharing economy. It hasn't worked out that way. But if we were to do the second edition, we actually, I think, would pull back on some of those claims.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So just in the 3 years since the book has been released, there's been a shift in.
We started writing it back in 2017, 2018. So I'd say it's over the last 5 years.
So it's been a few. Okay.
Well, what's your sense? I mean, do you see a lot of sharing economy?
I mean, yeah, not a lot. It's mostly when it comes to, like vacation rentals or anything that's like expensive, like you said, or not necessarily also expensive, but just things that if you had a lot of it, it would be expensive, like movies or video games or, digital media nowadays. It's a lot of...
right, but be careful, though. That's not sharing economy. That's digital economy, which is different.
Oh, okay.
So digital economy is really interesting in terms of ownership because you don't actually own it.
Yeah,
right?
true.
You'd buy a record. You'd buy, a DVD or a cassette of a movie. That's not how it works anymore. What you now do is pay for a license, right? That allows you to download the text of a book onto your Kindle or onto your laptop, or allows you to stream something. But you don't own it. And the streaming companies can and have taken them back without asking. Yeah, I mean, so digital economy I think is more interesting because that really is changing things, and it's difficult for us sort of cognitively because we're used to owning things, right? Solid, something, literally a thing, and we're moving from things to streams of ones and zeros, and it's not obvious what it means to own a line of ones and zeros.
Yeah, you are right. Yeah, with digital media, it gets blurry. Of what is ours, and do I just have a license and that's it?
Yeah, and the difficulty is that we have this carryover intuition of owning things. Well, therefore, if I paid for it, I must own it, like everything, all aspects of it. When in fact that's not the case at all. The contracts you click through without looking at, which I do too, that restricts quite a bit what you actually own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you made a good point about this like digital ownership, So now there's like AI coming out, right, with all these and gathering a bunch of data and even creating its own data. How do we properly establish boundaries of ownership with AI now in the picture?
Yeah, it's a great example, and it's happening in real time. Right. So does anything AI generate become the property of the company that created the the app or the algorithm? I mean, if you copyright it, maybe, right? But think of it differently. On the other side, how does AI function? It's scraped, over 100,000 books and other things on the web, and basically figured out which words tend to follow other words more frequently. All these patterns. Is that theft of the people who wrote the book? 2 of my books have been scraped. There's a website you can go to. You put your name in, it tells you have your books been scraped or not onto AI.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay.
Wow.
I didn't know there was a website.
What website is that?
I forget the name, but basically, there was a database of 110,000 books that were basically downloaded that the AI generators were using, basically as the model text to figure out how to program the AI. And there are several lawsuits that have been filed. New York Times has filed a lawsuit as well. And it's not obvious. It's not obvious, right? So it's one thing to say, look, if you reproduce a paragraph from my book or a page from my book, that's theft, right? That clearly is taking in whole what's mine and saying it's yours, right? What if you use my book to figure out what word is more likely to follow the word water or the word ownership, which is actually how AI training works, right? AI training doesn't think. It basically says, I've got these words, given what I know about the universe of text out there, what's the most likely word to follow?
Well, I had never heard of that.
It's a predictive. It
Exactly.
Generates as it kind of goes on. Like, okay,
Exactly.
I have this word, and this word comes next, and it next.
That's right. That's right.
It doesn't really think,
No.
or such.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people like now with AI, they're thinking that it's this like super intelligent being that, thinks on its own, but really what it's doing is that, it has such a big pool of data that it could reach from and just, filter the information that way.
Yeah, but you're exactly right. I would say probably the single biggest ownership question right now in the digital world is AI and content. Who owns the content that AI uses for training?
But it kind of mirrors how, let's say, me as a human, let's say you ask an AI to draw a picture, right? So me as a human, I have seen a bunch of images in my life. Creativity doesn't just come out of nowhere too. It's influenced by what I've seen, and then I draw something based on that. But I'm not sued on, based on that. I say that's
depends. I mean, if you're George Harrison and you write "My Sweet Lord," and it's pretty similar to "She's So Fine," turns out you do lose.
Okay. Yeah, if it's similar, yeah.
So how similar?
There's
is similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's super interesting questions, and the courts will decide. There's no obvious answer, no obvious single answer.
And what about these deep fake things, right? It's like I own my own voice, and now you're mimicking my voice. Like, do I own my own voice? Like, are there laws for that?
Well, so I mean, just think about the recent strike in Hollywood. Right, one of the biggest issues that was basically leading to the strike, to the picketing, and that they resolved in the new labor agreement, is that the movies and TV are not allowed to use AI to create a background, to create a crowd. Right, they need to have actual human actors who make the crowd.
Huh.
Really?
Yeah, which means obviously a lot more pay for union members who are part of a crowd.
Well, I didn't know that part.
I didn't. Yeah. What did you said the Hollywoods? I didn't catch that part.
There was a strike for about 3
There was a strike. Okay.
And no movies were made, no TV series were made. There were several issues. One of the main issues was AI.
Yeah.
Okay.
But wasn't it that they were against AI being used to write the shows, mainly like the scripts and whatnot, like instead of real writing?
That was part of it. That was the issue that got a lot of attention. The other issue that was equally important that didn't get attention was populating the screen. Or, for example, so to give another example, I could basically, with a computer and video, take a lot of videos of you doing various things. I could then pretty much make a movie of you doing these things without paying you actually for the time to do it.
Wow. Isn't that when one of the Black Mirror episodes from season 6? I don't know if you've seen that show or not.
Season 6, yeah.
No, okay. Yeah, there was that episode with Salma Hayek, basically, where they use her likeness to make a movie. It's like a whole complex thing, the whole episode, but
it's not science fiction anymore. I mean, you can, it's still a bit, faces are still hard, but we're not far off at all from being able to do that. And as you said, who owns my voice? Who owns your face?
Yeah, it's getting really weird and complicated.
Yeah, but it's all
we need a lot of time.
It's all storytelling, right? You own it because of self-possession. I own it because of labor. I did all the work for the algorithm to be able to do these things.
But what do we value more?
That's the thing.
Talk to the decision maker and find out what the decision maker values more. Or persuade the decision maker that they should value, labor over self-ownership, or the reverse, self-ownership over labor. The key thing to realize, the key insight of the book, which by the way is mine, How the Hidden Rules of Ownership Control Our Lives. I want a product plug here. Is that, again, ownership's up for grabs. These are valuable resources. More than one person wants them. There's not enough to go around, so we have to decide. And what's the basis for deciding who gets what?
No, yeah, I mean it's very evolving quickly, and I think we need a lot of time still to figure these things out. But like AI is just evolving so quick that it can be tough sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're having these kinds of discussions, right? Just to understand those fundamental rules of ownership, so that we could apply it to like these new concepts with AI. Because
and at least understand where the arguments are coming from. I think that's the most useful. Our book's not going to tell you what the right answer is, and no book is going to tell you what the right answer is, because there is no single right answer. What our book will do is help you figure out why there's a conflict and what's really going on.
Yeah, no, exactly, and yeah, the book is doing great in that aspect. And so maybe just before we have our last question, I do have one question that is a bit hypothetical. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Venus Project by any chance.
Sounds like a movie.
Have you ever heard of? So yeah, basically the Venus Project is this project that was founded out of Florida. The founder was like a futurist named Jacques Fresco, and basically what he was proposing as a new type of society is a resource-based economy. Instead of an economy that's based on capital and money, it's a bit futuristic, but basically says that we base it on resources and we have automation, robots, AI take over a lot of the labor and create a lot of abundance for people. So people wouldn't have to do all jobs that are manual or that a robot could basically do. So all their basic needs such as clothing, food, housing will all be met. Okay, I know this is a bit utopic here, but we're trying to entertain that idea. But basically what I'm trying to get at there is, if we were to live in such a society where a lot of things would be abundant and if I wanted this keyboard I could have it, he could have it, would there be any concept of ownership?
Well, it goes back to the fundamental point I made earlier, which is that ownership only matters when you have scarce resources that are valued, right? In the world that you just described, which frankly sounds a little boring, but that's okay.
Okay.
Resources aren't scarce, right? So no, there wouldn't be battles over ownership because there's enough to go around. Ownership only matters when there's not enough to go around.
Interesting. Okay. So it does come down to like the value of that we place on resources at the end of the day. So if a resource is more abundant, okay. And when you say boring, is it just because there's no like fighting going around?
No, I mean, if I have everything I want, where's the fun in that?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a weird life, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's different to think about, such a society. I mean, yeah. But I mean, when we say like, let's say water, because I know you discuss about water, you know, and how people have access to water. We do want people.
Unlimited water would be good.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I guess there would be some positive outcomes from living in that, but yeah, maybe the excitement of life wouldn't be.
Well, I guess people would have to find other challenges. I mean, other creative.
I think we're far from that, though, right?
Well, that's for another podcast.
Yeah, that's for another podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about all these types of ownership, and we thank you for giving your insights on all these pretty complicated issues. And like you said, I think it's going to be hard to solve a lot of these bigger conflicts in the 45 minutes that we spoke. But I just have a last question for you. So what is your message to people that are fighting right now, that are maybe spreading anti-Semitism or even doing hate crimes and all this stuff just because of all these wars that are going? Like, what is your message to them, and how do we stop this? And how should people take ownership and do their part?
Huh. Wow, that's
yeah.
I feel like that's true of the presidential debates. I mean, look, I mean, anti-Semitism or anti-Islam or any kind of hatred is just not acceptable in a civilized society. That's not a question of ownership. That's just a question of caring about our fellow human beings. So that to me is just it's a fundamental issue, but it's not about ownership. It's just about respect for other people. In terms of conflicts over ownership, which happen everywhere all the time and always will and always have, I think the thing that's important to realize, that certainly has helped me, is sort of two things. The first is to walk around with kind of ownership goggles on your eyes, because if you look at the world around you through the perspective of ownership, the world looks different. Right? So why do we have rules for this and don't have rules for that? When I'm in line at the store, why is it that I can't just jump ahead to the register and cut everyone off? Why is it that you can't walk over and take my butter? Right? There are all kinds of things happening every day that allow us to live in a pretty concentrated population without killing each other very often. And the reason we can do that is ownership rules. And kind of to realize all of a sudden that's what's going on. So have you seen the movie The Matrix?
Yes.
Yeah, of
All right,
course.
so this is classic scene where Neo, near the end, suddenly realizes the reality he knows is just these ones and zeros. That's kind of what I mean about ownership. Once you understand that almost all of our interactions are shaped by ownership rules that we just accept without even thinking. It's like a fish is swimming in water and doesn't realize it's water. Once you realize that, then you can say, okay, so when we have disagreements, what's the real nature of our disagreement? And it's going to be some variant of I had it first, I worked for it, it's part of me, it's attached to something I already have, I'm holding on to it, or it's in my it's my groups, it's my families. Those are the 6 stories. And once you realize that, a lot of conflicts become much clearer. And to an extent, if you can understand what really is the nature of the conflict, then it's easier to have a discussion that's honest and say, look, you're saying this. I get that. I'm saying this. Um, can we find common ground? I get where you're coming from. I understand your ownership story, and it's got some validity. Here's mine. Here's why I think mine is more persuasive. How are we going to figure this out? Instead of saying, you're a jerk because your skin color is this or your God is so and so, saying, okay, I understand your claim and its force. Here's my claim and its force. How are we going to figure this out?
Yeah. So I think almost, bringing these complex stories to like more trivial and fundamental levels to understand, the stories of each one rather than fighting.
That's right. I wouldn't say it's trivial. I mean, to that 2-year-old who lost the shovel, that's not trivial to that kid.
Okay.
People care about these things. But your basic insight, I think, is exactly right, which is that the stories are the same, whether you're talking about territorial conflict or a fight in the sandbox. And it's important to be able to sort of, reduce the world around you to the ones and zeros and figure out which stories are active. And once we know the stories, then we can understand, okay, here's how we're gonna manage that.
Yeah, that's super great advice. Well, I thank you for your time, and I would like to, give you the chance to tell everyone where they could reach you, find you on social media, tell them about your book a little more, and where they could buy it.
Sure. So the book is called Mine: How the Hidden Rules of Ownership Control Our Lives. It's available in paperback, in hardback. It's available in audiobook as well. We actually have a website called minethebook.com. That's got a bunch of cool videos on specific aspects, some of which we've talked about, but a bunch we didn't. I'm a law professor at UCLA in the States, so if you want to get in touch, you can find me on the faculty page. And thanks to you both. It's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, it's been really great. We thank you so much for this.
Yes. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on.